to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where the day can soften at the edges and your thoughts can drift like petals on a quiet breeze. Tonight you'll be carried to a gentle street called Blossom Boulevard, where a small bakery glows warmly behind a fogged window, and every comforting scent seems to invite your shoulders to loosen and your breathing to slow, fall open as if they have nothing to hold. Fall open as if they have nothing to hold anymore. Inhale slowly, as though you're sipping in calm air through a straw, and then exhale as if you're releasing a long sigh you've been saving all day. With each breath, imagine the day's noise turning down, like a lamp being dimmed. Sounds become softer, thoughts become farther away. You don't have to chase them, you don't have to solve anything. You can simply listen and let the story do the walking for you. Picture the air around you, growing velvety and safe. Picture your mind becoming a warm, quiet room with a comfortable chair placed right in the center. You can rest there now, letting your attention settle like a feather landing on still water. And somewhere not far from that calm inner room, there is a boulevard lined with blossoming trees and a bakery that keeps a steady, tender watch over the evening. Blossom Boulevard curved gently through a sleepy little town that rarely hurried, even on busy days. It was the kind of street that seemed designed for strolling, for pausing to notice the way lamplight pooled on cobblestones, and for leaning close to window displays, as if the glass might share a secret. In spring, the boulevard lived up to its name. Trees on either side lifted their branches like graceful arms, and pale blossoms gathered in soft clusters that looked almost like little clouds. The petals fell now and then, not all at once, but in patient drifts, as if the trees were slowly writing a letter to the earth. When a breeze moved through, the blossoms responded with a gentle shiver, and the air filled with a faint sweetness that felt like a memory. At the bend of the boulevard, where the sidewalks widened and the street lights wore old-fashioned caps, a small bakery sat beneath an awning the color of warm cream. Its sign swung lightly on iron hooks and read, in looping script, Blossom Boulevard Bakery. The windows were always a little fogged, as if the inside air carried its own weather, the kind made by ovens and rising dough. Behind the glass, soft amber light glowed steadily, and sometimes a passerby would slow without realizing it, drawn by a comforting scent that seemed to reach out like a hand. Inside, the bakery was a quiet world of its own. Wooden shelves held loaves that looked like small golden hills, their crusts crackled and deepened by careful heat. Baskets lined with cloth-cradled rolls and buns, each one dusted with flour that caught the light like a fine snowfall. On the counter, glass domes sheltered delicate pastries, their layers and swirls so neat they felt almost like little sculptures. A bell above the door offered a soft chime whenever it opened, not sharp or demanding, but gentle, like a small greeting from a friend. The floor was swept clean, the air warm, and somewhere in the back an oven hummed with a patient, steady breath. Mira was the baker, though most people in town didn't think of her by a single title. They thought of her as the keeper of warmth, the one who made mornings kinder and evenings sweeter, the one whose hands knew how to fold comfort into flour and water. She moved through the bakery with an unhurried grace, her apron tied neatly, her sleeves rolled just enough to free her wrists. Her hair was pinned loosely, as if it had been gathered without fuss, and her expression held a calm concentration that made the whole room feel quieter. A small cat lived there too, a round-bodied creature with a coat like toasted sugar and eyes the color of green tea. The cat's name was Crumb, and he treated the bakery as his kingdom, though he was generous enough to allow Mira to reign beside him. He liked warm spots, flowery corners, and the steady music of kneading. That evening, the bakery was lingering open later than usual. Outside, the sky had turned the soft indigo of dusk, and the blossoming trees were becoming silhouettes, their petals pale in the dimming light. The street lamps flickered on, one after another, as if the boulevard were slowly waking into a different kind of day. Mira had left the front door unlocked, the sign turned to welcome. There was no rush of customers now, only the occasional quiet visitor, someone who stepped in as if entering a sanctuary. A couple of neighbors had stopped by for a loaf wrapped in brown paper. A child had come with a coin clutched in a small hand, asking for a bun glazed with honey. Each had left with their purchase held close, and with their shoulders somehow softer than when they arrived. Now the bakery belonged to the late hour. It belonged to the hush between footsteps outside. It belonged to the sound of Mira's knife tapping gently against a wooden board, to the whisper of parchment paper, to the soft sigh of cooling racks. Mira had placed them there not as a reminder of the past, but as a promise of the future. Mira had placed them there not as decoration alone, but because the scent reminded her to move slowly, to let each motion be gentle. She was preparing something special that night, something she didn't make often, and never when she felt rushed. It was an old recipe, one that had been passed to her in a different town, in a different life, from a baker whose hands were always dusted with flour and whose voice had been as soothing as a kettle's quiet song. The recipe was for a loaf called Moonmilk Bread. It wasn't truly magical in any loud, sparkling way. It didn't float or glow or burst into song. Its magic, if it could be called that, was quieter. It was the kind of thing that made a person feel safe when they ate it, as if they were wrapped in a warm blanket and told, without words, that everything could wait until morning. Moonmilk bread was made with simple ingredients, but with attention so deep it felt like devotion. Milk warmed gently until it smelled sweet and comforting. A whisper of vanilla, a pinch of salt. Flour sifted slowly, like soft rain, a starter that had been fed and cared for, alive in the small way the dough is alive. And one other thing, optional but always welcome. Blossoms steeped into the milk until the liquid carried their fragrance, faint and dreamy. Mira set a small pot on the stove, and the flame beneath it was low, barely there. She poured in milk and watched it settle, smooth and pale. As it warmed, steam rose in thin strands. She breathed it in, not as a task, but as a moment. The scent was soft, and behind it, the faint floral notes of the blossoms she added. Just a small handful, as if she were making tea for the night. Crumb hopped up onto a nearby stool, his tail curling around his paws. He watched Mira with steady interest, as though supervising an important ritual. His whiskers twitched when the aroma grew richer, and he blinked slowly, satisfied. The bakery held its warmth like a held breath. In the back, the oven's gentle hum continued. The walls, lined with shelves and hooks, seemed to listen. Even the jars of sugar and spice looked calm, their contents still and patient. When the milk was ready, Mira strained it, letting the blossoms fall away into a small dish. The milk remained, now scented and slightly tinted by the petal's presence, like moonlight caught in a cup, was soothing, quiet and repetitive, like was soothing, quiet and repetitive like waves brushing ashore. Flour followed, sifted in small amounts, and Mira worked it in, letting the dough come together without force. There was a certain way she touched the dough, as if she were greeting it rather than commanding it. She pressed and folded, pressed and folded, the rhythm steady. Her hands moved as if they had always known this motion, as if the motion itself were a kind of lullaby. Outside, Blossom Boulevard settled deeper into night. A couple walked past the window, their steps slow, their voices hushed. A breeze stirred the blossoms in the trees, and a few petals drifted down to the sidewalk, landing like soft confetti that no one needed to sweep away. Inside, the dough grew smoother under Mira's patient hands. She added a touch of honey, not enough to make it sweet, only enough to round the edges of its flavor. She added a small knob of butter, soft and willing, and the dough accepted it with quiet ease. When it was ready, Mira set the dough into a bowl and covered it with a clean cloth. She placed it near the warmest part of the kitchen, where it could rise slowly, as though it were dreaming its way into being. With the dough resting, Mira moved to the front of the shop. She wiped the counter, though it hardly needed it, and arranged the remaining pastries under their glass domes. She liked the feeling of small preparations. She liked the way tidying could be a form of care. A kettle sat on a small shelf, and she filled it with water, setting it to warm. Tea would be good later after the bread was shaped and baked. Tea would be good when the night became quieter still, when the street outside turned into a corridor of lamplight and shadow. Crumb jumped down from his stool and padded toward the front window. He sat, watching the boulevard, as if expecting something. His ears flicked once, then again. Mira noticed, and her gaze followed his. A figure had paused outside, just beneath the awning. Not a hurried customer, not someone rushing in with a last-minute request. This person stood still, looking up at the swinging sign, then at the fogged window, as though deciding whether to enter a place that felt almost too gentle to disturb. After a moment, the door opened, and the bell chimed softly. The visitor stepped inside, and for a second, the cool night air slipped in with them, bringing the faint scent of blossoms and distant rain. Then the door closed again, and warmth wrapped around them once more. It was an older woman, her hair silver and loosely braided over one shoulder. She wore a coat the color of river stones and a scarf that looked hand-woven. In her hands, she carried a small paper parcel folded with care. Her eyes moved around the bakery slowly, taking in the shelves, the loaves, the warm light. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that arrived gently, as if it had been traveling a long way. Mira stepped from behind the counter, not startled, not rushing. "Good evening," she said, her voice low and calm. "Good evening," the woman replied. Her voice was soft, too, as if she had learned long ago that softness could be strength. "I wasn't sure you'd still be open." "Tonight I am," Mira said. The bakery felt like staying awake a little longer. The woman nodded as though she understood. She set her parcel on the counter and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small glass jar filled with something pale and thick, starter, alive and gently bubbling. It looked like it had been tended with love. "I thought this might belong here," the woman said. Mira leaned closer, and her expression softened further, recognition blooming in her eyes. "Is that—" "Yes," the woman said. "It's from a kitchen that once taught you patience." Mira's hands hovered over the jar as if it were delicate. She didn't touch it right away. She simply looked, letting memory rise like warm steam. The bakery, for a moment, seemed to grow quieter still, as though even the shelves were listening. Mira had learned to bake in another town long ago, when she'd been younger and restless and unsure where she belonged. She'd found a small bakery there, tucked beside a river, and she'd been taken in by an old baker who believed that bread could hold a person together when life felt scattered. That old baker had kept a starter she called Lumen. She said it had been alive for longer than anyone could remember, passed from hand to hand, fed and cared for, carrying a thread of continuity through time. "It's not just flour and water," she'd said. "It's the memory of every loaf it's ever become." Mira had not thought of Lumen in years, not directly. She'd carried the lessons, of course, the slow kneading, the careful proofing, the way to listen to dough rather than force it. But she'd never expected to see the starter again, alive in a jar on her own counter. "How did you find me?" Mira asked softly. The woman's smile held a hint of mystery, but not the unsettling kind. It was the kind of mystery that felt like moonlight on a familiar path. "Starters travel," she said, "and so do stories. Yours reached the right ears." Crumb, who had been watching from the window, padded over and sniffed the air around the jar. He blinked slowly, then sat, satisfied. Mira finally touched the jar, her fingers resting against the cool glass. A sense of steadiness moved through her like a deep breath. "Thank you," she said, and the words carried more than politeness. They carried gratitude and a quiet awe. The woman waved a hand as if brushing away praise. "It needed a warm home," she said, "and this place feels like one." Mira looked around the bakery, seeing it through the visitor's eyes. She saw the glow of lamplight on wood. She saw the flour dusted like soft powder on the counter. She saw the baskets and jars in careful order. She felt the warmth that lingered, even when the ovens were resting. "It is," Mira said. "It's meant to be." The woman nodded once more. "I won't keep you long. I only wanted to deliver it while the boulevard was still awake." As if the boulevard were a living thing, breathing blossoms and lamplight, Mira offered the woman a seat at a small table near the window. "Would you like tea?" she asked. "Yes," the woman said, settling into the chair with a quiet sigh. "If it's not too much trouble." "It's no trouble," Mira replied and set about preparing it. The kettle, now warm, began to sing softly. Mira chose a tin of herbal tea, one that smelled of chamomile and lavender. She spooned the dried flowers into a small pot, then poured the hot water over them. The steam rose, carrying a scent that seemed to smooth the air. She brought the tea to the table with 2 cups, placing them down with care. Crumb jumped onto the spare chair, curling into a neat circle as though he too had been invited. The woman lifted her cup and breathed in. "This smells like a kind night," she murmured. Mira sat across from her, hands wrapped around her own cup. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply listened to the bakery's quiet sounds. The distant hum of the oven, the soft tick of a clock, the faint murmur of night outside. Then the woman spoke again, her voice low. "What are you baking tonight?" Mira glanced toward the back, where the dough was rising beneath its cloth. "Moonmilk bread," she said. The woman's eyes brightened, just slightly. "Ah," she said, as if the name itself were a familiar melody. "That's a good bread for nights like this." Mira nodded. "It is." They sipped tea and the warmth spread slowly, not rushing, settling into their bodies like comfort finding its place. Outside, the boulevard seemed to exhale. The air grew cooler, and the blossoms on the trees looked almost luminous in the lamplight. After a while, Mira stood and returned to the back. The dough had risen, soft and pillowy. When she lifted the cloth, she saw its surface smooth and slightly domed, as though it had been gathering its own quiet confidence. She turned it out onto the counter, the dough releasing with a gentle sigh. A dusting of flour made the wood beneath it pale. Mira pressed her fingertips into the dough lightly, testing it. It yielded and sprang back slowly, alive and responsive. She folded it, shaping it into a long, tender loaf. Her movements were unhurried, each fold careful, each turn smooth. She tucked the edges beneath, creating tension on the surface, the way she'd been taught long ago beside that river. As she worked, she thought of continuity, of hands passing knowledge forward, of warmth carried from one oven to another, of the way a single recipe could travel across years and streets and still feel like home. She placed the shaped loaf into a pan lined with parchment, then covered it again to rise once more. The bakery's air held it gently like a cradle. In the front, the woman continued to sip her tea. Her gaze drifted to the window where petals stuck to the glass in delicate shapes. Now and then, she looked toward the back, not impatient, only quietly present. Crumb purred, the sound low and steady, like a small engine of contentment. Time in the bakery moved differently than it did out on the boulevard. It moved like dough rising, slow and sure. It moved like tea steeping, deepening gently. It moved like the soft shift of lamplight, steady and warm. When the loaf was ready for the oven, Mira uncovered it and brushed its top with a little more of the blossom-steeped milk. The surface shone faintly. She scored it with a sharp blade, making one long, confident line that would allow it to expand. Then she opened the oven. Heat rolled out, not harsh but welcoming, like a warm room opened on a cold night. Mira slid the pan inside, then closed the door. She listened for a moment to the sound of the loaf settling into its baking. The quiet crackle of heat meeting dough. In the minutes that followed, the bakery filled with a scent that was almost impossible to describe fully. It was bread, yes, warm and yeasty and golden, but it was also milk and blossoms, honey and butter, all of it blending into something that felt like comfort, given form. Outside, the boulevard grew emptier. The last few pedestrians wandered home. Shops darkened one by one. Street lights continued their gentle watch. Inside, the bakery became a small island of warmth in a sea of night. Mira returned to the table near the window. The woman looked up, her eyes kind. "It smells like a dream," she said. Mira smiled, and the smile was quiet, like the rest of the evening. "It always does," she replied. They sat together listening. They didn't need many words. The bakery itself seemed to speak in scent and warmth and hush. As the bread baked, the woman began to tell a story, not a dramatic one, not filled with sharp turns. It was the kind of story that wandered gently, like someone walking slowly down Blossom Boulevard. She spoke of the river town, of the old baker who had kept Lumen alive. She spoke of mornings where mist rose from the water and drifted into the bakery through open windows. She spoke of the way bread had been shared there, sometimes with strangers, sometimes with friends, sometimes with people who didn't yet know they were loved. Mira listened, her hands cradling her cup. She could almost see it. The river's slow movement, the mist, the old baker's flour-dusted hands. It felt less like remembering and more like being gently reminded of something her body already knew. As the woman's voice moved through the air, Crumb's purring continued, soft and rhythmic. When the timer chimed, it was a small, polite sound, not an intrusion. Mira stood and walked to the oven. She opened it, and the loaf inside was risen and golden, its crust shining. The score line had opened into a gentle ridge like a smile. She lifted the pan out and set it on a rack. The bread crackled softly as it cooled, tiny pops and whispers as the crust settled. The scent deepened, filling the bakery even more fully. Mira cut a small slice once it was cool enough, careful not to rush. The interior was tender, pale, and softly springy. She spread a little butter over it, and it melted immediately, sinking into the warm crumb. She brought the slice to the table and set it before the woman. The woman broke off a piece and ate it slowly, eyes half-lidded. She chewed, as if savoring not just flavor, but feeling. After a moment, she sighed, and the sigh seemed to loosen something in the room. "Yes," she murmured. "That's the one." Mira tasted her own slice. Warmth spread through her chest, gentle and steady. It didn't feel like excitement. It felt like peace, like coming home to a familiar chair beside a fire. For a while, they simply ate and sipped tea. The bakery's light seemed to grow softer, as if the lamps themselves were becoming sleepy. Outside, the boulevard was nearly silent now, only the occasional rustle of branches, only the faint whisper of petals moving along the sidewalk. Eventually, the woman set down her cup. "I should go," she said, though there was no urgency in her voice. "Night likes to be quiet." Mira nodded. She wrapped a loaf of Moonmilk Bread in brown paper and tied it with twine. She added the jar of lumen to a small bag, padding it with cloth. When she handed the bundle to the woman, their fingers brushed, and Mira felt a gentle certainty settle in her bones. Something had been returned. Something had found its place. At the door, the woman paused. She looked back at the bakery, at the warm light, at the shelves. "Keep baking slowly," she said. "Keep making this boulevard softer." "I will," Mira replied. The woman stepped outside, and the bell chimed its quiet farewell. The door closed, and the bakery held its warmth again. Mira stood for a moment listening to the night. She imagined the woman walking beneath the blossoming trees, her scarf trailing softly, petals drifting down around her like a blessing. Then Mira turned the sign to closed, not with a click of finality, but with a gentle acceptance. She moved through the bakery, tidying the counter, washing a bowl, wiping flour from the wood. Each small task was done slowly, as if the night itself were guiding her hands. Crumb followed, occasionally pausing to inspect a corner, occasionally curling up in a warm patch of floor. His eyes blinked in lazy contentment. Mira fed the starter, stirring in flour and water with a quiet reverence. She watched it thicken, watched bubbles begin to form, watched it become alive again. In its small, steady way, she set it in a safe place where it could rest and grow. The ovens cooled gradually, releasing their heat with patience. The bakery's air shifted from baking warmth to a softer, lingering coziness, like the last embers in a hearth. Outside, Blossom Boulevard was sleeping now. The streetlights kept their gentle watch, Blossoms clung to branches and petals lay scattered like pale, soft notes on the ground. Mira dimmed the lamps one by one until only a small light remained near the window, a final warm glow for the night. She stood there a moment, looking out at the boulevard, at the trees, at the quiet curve of the street. In the hush, it almost seemed as if the blossoms were breathing, almost as if the night itself had a slow rhythm, like the rise and fall of dough. Crumb stretched, then padded over to Mira, rubbing against her ankle. Mira bent and rested a hand on his warm back. Stroking gently, the bakery felt complete. The bread was baked, the starter was fed, the counters were clean, the night was calm, and in that calm, everything seemed to soften, as if the world had decided to be kind. The remaining light in the bakery glowed like a small moon. Mira moved toward the back, where a little room waited for her rest. She didn't rush. She allowed herself to be unhurried, to follow the night's slow pace. Crumb curled up on a cushion, already drifting, his breathing small and even. Outside petals shifted slightly with the breeze. A quiet sound like a whisper in a dream. The boulevard held its blossoms close. The bakery held its warmth close. The whole town seemed to settle deeper into stillness, like a blanket being drawn up. In that softness, the story loosens its grip. The light becomes gentler, the air becomes quieter. The thoughts that might have been circling begin to slow, like leaves settling on calm water. Everything can wait. The bakery will still be there in the morning, with its shelves and its scent of bread, with its soft bell and its warm windows, with its steady heart of heat and care. For now, there is only the night and the tender hush of Blossom Boulevard and the feeling of warmth lingering like a comforting hand. Rest can arrive without effort. Sleep can come like a slow wave. Breath in, breath out. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.